Good evening. Good evening and welcome to this webinar on the virus Bluetongue. My name is William Irvine, President of the Ulster Farmers Union. And 2 weeks ago, when the Bluetongue disease reached the shores of Northern Ireland, it changed things for Northern Ireland agriculture. It was quite ironic because people were just starting to relax because we thought the danger period for the midges coming across was just about to end. But at the last lap, they reached our shores. So the affected farms and the farms within the zone have serious concerns at this moment in time. And indeed, all of Northern Ireland farmers are nervous of what this means and what it means now immediately and what it may bring next spring. The control zones are on the east coast, and that seems to be as far as the midges have got for now. But I think it is significant that this disease is now on the island of Ireland. We have a strong list of speakers to talk us through what this disease is, what the implications are, and how we as farmers can hope to deal with it. There's going to be 5 presentations, short presentations, and then we'll be taking the panel will be taking questions at the end of that. And our first, I'm going to introduce all the speakers at the beginning here now. The first panelist is Ignatius McKeown, and he's the DAERA Divisional Veterinary Officer for Episodic Diseases. And he'll be laying out the fundamentals of this disease. Then Ignatius is followed by Gordon Hickman from DAERA. Gordon is Head of Exotic Disease Policy within DAERA, and he's going to sort of talk us through the way this disease played out in GB. We have Jim Lee, DAERA Episodic Disease Policy person, and he's going to put his take on that forward. Then we have Julian Henderson, DAERA Senior Principal Veterinary Officer for Trade, and it's the movement of livestock and the smooth flow of trade that's extremely critical in this situation. And last but by no means least, we have Melanie Spahn. Melanie's a private veterinary practitioner and president of the AVSP-NI, and Melanie's going to sort of lay out options and protocols around vaccination. When it comes to the question and answers, we're going to be also supported by Pilar Romero from GB and David Kyle from our own department. So just before we move forward into the presentations, just a few housekeeping notes. Just be aware that this evening's event will be recorded, and a link will be sent out to everyone that post the event to watch again if you so wish. Anyone at the question part of the evening, the Q&A should be through the Q&A button on your iPad or laptop or phone, and be aware the button may be at the top of the screen. Overall, we expect the session to last no more than 2 hours, and hopefully you will all find it informative and useful. As my discussions and my travels through Northern Ireland, there's a hunger for information and more firm knowledge around the situation we find ourselves in, and hopefully this webinar will address that. When we suggested it to our department, they were very ready and willing to facilitate it, and that's played out with the strong panel that we have here tonight. Just before we start, I'd also just like to acknowledge the support of Brian Dooher, the Chief Vet in this, and he has been very helpful, and he sends his apologies that due to prior engagement he can't be with us tonight, but his team are here. So that's the introduction. The first presentation is from Ignatius McKeown. Ignatius, over to you.
Thanks very much, William. Good evening, everybody. I suppose we are meeting about Bluetongue, so I suppose it's important to talk about the disease first. Then I'll go on to the clinical signs and then update you with the situation in Northern Ireland at present. So the first thing is, what is Bluetongue? What kind of a disease is it? So it's an infectious, which means it can spread from animal to animal. Non-contagious, which means that one animal doesn't pass it directly to another. Vector-borne viral disease. So vector-borne means that it is spread by midges. Again, as I say, this is unusual for the island of Ireland, and that we normally don't suffer a lot from vector-borne diseases, but vector-borne diseases are becoming more common. It affects all ruminants, cattle, sheep, goats, deer, and many other species of ruminants. The clinical signs basically can vary from inapparent, which is what we've seen to date so far in Northern Ireland, to a severe clinical picture with multiple deaths. And again, a good example of that was what happened in the Netherlands a couple of years ago whenever the Bluetongue first hit their particular populations. Now, on the slide there, it says there's 24 different serotypes. This is a virologist's dream in that you can have multiple serotypes, and I think the figure is now up to 29 different serotypes. The important thing about that is that each of those different serotypes acts quite similarly to an individual different disease. And if you protect against one serotype, it doesn't mean that it protects against other serotypes as well. So that's why there are different vaccines available for the different diseases, or for the different types and serotypes within Bluetongue. So again, we were saying there, it can affect all ruminants, can cause clinical signs in all ruminants, but sheep are the ones which are worst affected. And again, there's multiple deaths have been reported, as I say, in the Netherlands and across in GB. But Gordon will talk a bit more about that. Again, not transmitted through contact with animals, wool, or milk. Okay, next slide, please. Another important thing to remember in all the discussions about Bluetongue is that there is no public health risk associated with the disease. All the controls in relation to Bluetongue relate to the live animal, and that is because there are no public health risks associated with the disease. So again, animal-to-animal spread mainly by the insect vector, but it can also be spread by the transfer of blood transfusions, things like that, from an infected animal to a naive animal, and also importantly through semen and other germinal products. Any animal which recovers from infection basically will develop long-term immunity from the strain, and whenever animals are surveyed, the antibody response can be seen many years after infection. The incubation period, like most viral diseases, is in the region of 48 days. So next slide, please. So what is Bluetongue? The potential symptoms. So whenever we're talking about Bluetongue, three main clinical signs, or whatever it is, the three Fs. Fever. So basically the animal has a high temperature. Salivation, depression, and panting. Nasal discharge. Crusting around the eyes, crusting around the nose, crusted nose. Swelling of the face, lips, eyelids, and again you can see the picture on the right there, this massively swollen head of that affected sheep. Whenever we go further into it, there's ulceration of the mouth. It also causes lameness, abortion, deformed offspring, and eventually resulting in death. Okay, next slide, please. More clinical signs. While just for interest, we can see there the sign there of the coronary band of a sheep's foot. This sheep would be extremely lame, despite the fact that that clinical sign doesn't seem particularly obvious. But that's because any lesion which affects the foot causes severe lameness. Again, crusting around the nostrils is another potential sign of this disease. Next slide, please. Ulcers in the mouth, and again, most of the pictures you see are of sheep, but these are of cattle, so cattle are also affected. Ulcers, you can see there the effect on the nose, crusting on the nose, and again, the teeth can also affect the teeth. One of the interesting things about one of the first cases in GB way back in 2007 was it was actually phoned in as a suspect case of foot and mouth. So some of these signs are similar to what we would see in a foot and mouth outbreak as well. Okay, next slide, please. So in Bluetongue, it's notifiable in Northern Ireland. So basically, if anybody suspects that their animal is affected with Bluetongue, there is a requirement to report it to the local divisional veterinary office. So the reporting can be done either by yourself or by your PVP, by contacting your DAERA direct regional office or the DAERA helpline on 0300 200 7840. Northern Ireland's Bluetongue free status was suspended at 9 p.m. on Saturday, the 29th of November, as a result of confirmation of BTV3 found in a herd in County Down. As I said earlier, one of the main effects of this basically is the effect on trade and the export of susceptible animals to other countries. Next slide, please. So the overview of the first case, which was found near Bangor, it was as a result of our abattoir survey. During the period when the midges are active, we carry out a survey at the abattoir. This is to provide two issues. The first issue to provide assurances in the old days, whenever we didn't have Bluetongue, to where it was the initial report of Bluetongue in Northern Ireland at that particular time. So there was 2 cows reported from AFB as being positive as BTV3. Neither of these animals was vaccinated. So it came from a sheep and cattle farm near Bangor. The holding was immediately placed under restriction with no movements on or off the premises, and it also affected the movement on and off of germinal products. So semen moving onto the premises was also controlled as well. Next slide, please. So we sampled the rest of the remaining livestock at the affected premises, and again resulted in the finding of Bluetongue in a further 44 cattle. This is unusual, and again was unusual both in a Northern Ireland context and in a GB context in the number of affected animals on the one premises. So the samples were sent to the National Reference Laboratory across in Pirbright, and it was confirmed on the 5th of December. And they also confirmed Bluetongue serotype 3, BTV3. Tracing was carried out from all animals which left the farm from the 1st of September until the date of the restrictions. To date, all of those cattle have been tested and are all negative. Next slide, please. So once you get a positive case, the next thing we have to do is find how much Bluetongue is there in the locality. And to do that, we've set up a surveillance program within the 20-kilometre restricted zone. So whenever we carried out our surveillance, basically we found a further case in the Ards Peninsula, just south of Grey Abbey. And further testing has also recorded in relation to surveillance, basically a further farm in the Ards Peninsula that has just recently been reported. There was a third case found as part of surveillance close to the first case. So currently the total number of cases is standing at 4. In the other affected farms, there was 1 animal recorded in the second case, 2 animals in the third, and 2 animals in the fourth case as well. So again, the Bluetongue had affected the farms. To date, there's been no clinical signs of disease on those farms. It was just purely found as a result of the serological surveillance. So the last 2 cases basically did not require an extension of the TCZ. So whenever you look on the DAERA website, you'll see the extent of the zone. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay. You're on mute, William, if you're speaking.
Yep. Thank you, Ignatius, for that overview of where we're at for now. And now I'm going to bring in Gordon Hickman from DAERA to put the GB perspective on things. Gordon.
Good evening, and thank you, William. So I've been asked just to give an outline of the position in GB and perhaps the journey that we've been on since 2023. So basically, we've had 3 vector seasons now where we've had disease cases. So I'll give you a very quick overview of 2023, which is when we lost our country freedom, 24, 25, and then a little bit about clinical signs. Next slide, please. Next one. So in 2023, much the same as you, in the 10th of November, as part of our routine surveillance along the south and east coast, we detected a positive case. And then a few while later, we detect a second case in Norfolk. So those are those 2 temporary control zones you can see on the map on the right-hand side. Like yourselves, we embarked on a program of TCZ surveillance. We actually sampled every susceptible animal, or every farm with susceptible animals. And by the time we got into what we call the seasonal vector low period, I think you call it the vector inactive period, we detected cases on 73 different premises, but we'd only found them within those 2 temporary control zones. And we're detected in 126 animals, mostly cattle, but 7 were in sheep. And like yourselves, none of those animals showed any clinical signs in that first year. There were no established links between Kent and Norfolk, and all of those animals were homebred, no imported animals, etc. And we had no evidence of circulation in the UK midge population. Next slide, please. And so our policy response to those findings, initially we were in what we call the low transmission period, so there were still active midges. And so we actually culled the first few cases until we got into that vector inactive period. At that point, we then stopped culling animals. We undertook that active surveillance, and our policy intent was to prevent the spread of disease and to minimise any risk of overwintering. We were able to lift those temporary control zones on the 19th of February, the following year, after having completed that surveillance. But we left what we call high-risk animals, so that's entire males, pregnant females, because you can get maternal transmission, and anything that we hadn't tested, they stayed under restriction. I'm now going to talk about the 2024 vector season, which started in March, that period. And then there's going to be a whole series of slides that will hopefully automatically go through, showing how we had sort of responded to that. So next slide, and if we can start off. So we first found disease on the 26th of August in 2024. might just need to hit the button again. Hopefully it'll get going. And then we did temporary control surveillance. Every time we found a new case outside of the 20-kilometre zone, we started extending that zone. Once it was evident that we got local transmission, we turned those temporary control zones into restricted zones. That's the red areas. And then we just kept testing. We kept looking for traced animals, etc. And over time, you can see we're now about October 24. We'd covered, something like 40% of England. Still kept testing. Obviously, this is Midge-borne, and we'd had some animal movements by then. And we just kept extending that zone, giving people time to take up the possibility of vaccination and to start protecting themselves. I think we're nearly at the end. You can see particularly strong along the south coast where we had those wind-borne incursions. So this is really just a summary of the 2024 vector season. All those red triangles are the confirmed cases, and the yellow triangles are traced animals. So these were animals that were in the restricted zone at the time of infection, but had moved, if you like, between them being infected and us having traced them. And you'll see that 2 of them were in Wales, but there was no evidence of active infection in that, what is the white area. So all the active infection was in the restricted area. And by the end of the year, we'd got to 262 cases, of which 261 were Bluetongue 3, which obviously is what you have in Northern Ireland. And we had a single incursion in a single animal of Bluetongue 12. That was a little bit surprising, but the Netherlands had 12 cases in all of Bluetongue 12. It was it wasn't dominant at all, but we did manage to detect it as part of our surveillance. And 904 positive animals. Next slide. So our disease control approach was very much to develop in partnership with industry and devolved government colleagues. And the policy was to slow the spread of disease through movement controls. This is vector-borne, as Ignatius said. There's no way you can actually control those vectors, but we just wanted to slow the spread of disease because obviously in GB, the west of the country is very much denser in terms of livestock and susceptible stock, whereas in the east is predominantly animal. So we just wanted to slow that spread, and we really didn't know what we were going to find in terms of clinical signs. We'd seen the position in the Netherlands with huge numbers of increased mortality and severe clinical signs, and we just wanted to slow that spread. We developed a control framework which essentially said at some stage we would recognise that we would need to lift those movement restrictions because actually the impact of those movement restrictions were more significant in terms of the economic impact than the clinical signs. We also facilitated the access to vaccines, initially through emergency approval and general licensing, and then encouraged pharmaceutical colleagues to authorise products in GB. And on the 1st of July, it became apparent that we took a view to extend to the whole of England to have a restricted zone. Next slide, please. By that time, although we'd extended the RZ, we hadn't got our first case of disease in the new vector season. That came shortly afterwards on the 11th of July. Next slide, please. So on the 11th of July, we confirmed our first new case of the 2025 vector season. We are pretty certain that was overwintering because it was in Herefordshire, well away from any of the coastal areas. And it was, again, a homebred animal that hadn't moved from the east of the country. And we, like in Northern Ireland, this is a notifiable disease. And so we investigated those cases, working with private vets, and all those red triangles are the cases that we've detected so far this year. You'll also just about be able to spot that there are 8 green triangles in amongst there, 7 of them in Cornwall and 1 on the Isle of Wight. Those are Bluetongue 8. And we believe that, again, they came across in an infected midge plume from northern France, where there is a significant outbreak of Bluetongue 8 as well as Bluetongue 3. So again, you'll see most of those cases are along the south and southwest coast, but there is also a cluster up in Derbyshire, Cheshire, where there's clearly been overwintering and local transmission. So far, we've had 249 cases. I'll talk a little bit more about Wales on the next slide, but we now have cases in Wales as well, in 576 animals. Next slide, please. So coming to the end of my bit, just our policy in GB. So in England, we've been on this journey from having temporary control zones, lifting them, waiting to see what happened, getting a new wind-borne incursion, and then gradually extending those zones out. We are now living with Bluetongue 3. We haven't yet made the total decision on Bluetongue 8 because we just have those few numbers of cases. So those individual affected animals remain under restriction, but we haven't put in any new zones to around Bluetongue 8. However, if we got a new serotype, and we do know that Bluetongue 1 and 4 is in continental Europe, I think we would look at it on a case-by-case basis. In Wales, I obviously can't speak on the policy, but I can describe what's happened. So Welsh colleagues followed a similar approach to England, with the initial objective to keep disease out. So when we had our restricted zones, any animals moving into Wales had to be tested. That was relaxed a little bit to allow vaccinated animals to move in towards the end of this year. But unfortunately, they themselves found a case in a reported through a suspect case, and they put a temporary control zone in place. That was on the 26th of September this year, and they undertook temporary control surveillance, found a few more cases in that TCZ, but they also then started to find cases along the England border. All of those cases are quite close to England and very likely to be caused by local transmission. And so on the 10th of November, the CVO in Wales confirmed an all Wales restricted zone. So now effectively you've got England and Wales at the same disease control status, and animals can move freely between them under a general licence. In Scotland, the situation is slightly different in that they have no Bluetongue cases at all, no evidence of transmission. And again, their policy is to try and keep disease out. Now we're in this low transmission period. There have been some derogations that allow fattening animals, slaughter animals, and low-risk animals, so non-pregnant animals, can move under a general licence. Obviously, anything with the clinical signs cannot move. But those higher risk animals, so bulls, pregnant cattle, and any form of germinal product, need to be tested before they move out. So that's how our policies evolved and where we're at. Just a little bit about what we've seen in terms of clinical signs. So next slide, please. So colleagues in APHA did some intensive interviews of anyone that would speak to them that had a disease confirmed on their premises, and spoke to a total of 68 farms in all to try and get a picture of the clinical picture on farm. Next slide. So like yourselves, overall severity was relatively low. Some farms did experience severe clinical signs and mortality directly or indirectly associated with bluetongue. And of the known deaths, we know that 61 animals either died, roughly half and half, or were euthanized because of the welfare impact on them. But compared to the Netherlands, that's very, very minor level of mortality. As Ignatius said, the most common signs in cattle were lethargy, nasal discharge, and some crusting around the muzzle. And in sheep, again, lethargy and lameness. Typically, those animals did recover, usually after a week or so, but there was some weight loss and there's almost certainly some production losses associated with that. I think what we're seeing in GB, the most significant clinical signs are fertility impacts. So we did see a spate in the spring of 2025 of deformed calves, stargazing calves, sometimes described as dummy calves as well, and increased numbers of empty cows and some abortions. And we're now starting to just see some more of that this autumn. So increased levels of infertility and abortions. And we are worried that we'll start to see next spring those same sort of stargazing calves and dummy calves. In sheep, much fewer cases so far, and similar types of reproductive issues, although much less so than we're seeing in cattle. So I think that's what we've seen so far, and I think that's me done.
Thank you for that, Gordon. That is quite stark the way it just over the space of 2 years marched across England there. But it's informative to see that English story laid out. We're going to move on now to Jim Blee from DAERA's Episodic Disease Policy Branch. Jim, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, William. And just following on there from colleagues on the call. So I suppose talking a little bit about, what preparations that we've had in place and how our response has developed at pace, probably, William, over recent weeks as well. I mean, we have been for up to 18 months now. We've always carried out abattoir sampling, actually, and that was to demonstrate continued freedom to the EU. We did, given our sort of horizon scanning and the developments in Netherlands and in GB, expand that active surveillance at the abattoirs quite significantly about 18 months ago. So it was increased tenfold on a Northern Ireland basis. And on the 4 eastern DVOs, which would be assessed as at a higher risk for a midge-borne incursion, they were increased up to 15-20 times. We carried on with the post-import testing, but I suppose, as we know, the disease situation in GB has resulted in no moves of live susceptible species from GB since 2023, and given the spread of Bluetongue 3 across Europe as well too, there have been limited live animal imports, which in some ways has been a blessing, but any that have been permitted have undergone their post-import testing. We've talked a lot about midges. We've talked a lot about vector active periods and vector inactive periods. We have, with our colleagues in AFBI, it's been a long-standing arrangement where we've had 7 midge traps dispersed broadly at 45 by 45 tiles, which is a required surveillance level, and those are broadly across Northern Ireland, covering all those areas. We have investigated suspect cases promptly. We've had 1 or 2 prior to these confirmed cases, and we undertook extensive staff training. Again, great thanks to colleagues from GB, both policy and veterinary colleagues, who provided staff training to DAERA staff at an event earlier last year. And we've continued with that horizon scanning watching the developments, working closely with our colleagues in GB, being part of those discussions in GB, and understanding the rationale in various approaches, which has obviously been a great help to ourselves, and we are very grateful for that engagement with our colleagues, and also continuing to watch developments across the EU as well. So move on to the next slide. I suppose some of that is reflected in some of the tools that we have at our use as well. This is a midge plume model from June of this year. It was originally, the hazard manager was originally two sites. They have now been extended to 4 sites on the sort of western coast of GB. I think what this tells us, and what it can tell us, is that, you know, when there are potential conditions exist that an incursion of infected midges may have landed, and we have used this tool along with laboratory results and other information. I think it's one of those things, William, and the vets will speak better to this, and we'll maybe pick it up in Q&A. It's very difficult to tie down when you might have an incursion, but you can look at a range of information, including laboratory results, this plume data, and other information which, you know, may help you to define a period. And we used that to define our risk window back to the 1st of September, where we traced animals from the original premises, as you'll remember. So next slide, please. Sorry, next one, sorry. That again, sorry, that was a bit of... We also, through the Met Office, and this is information from sort of March to June 2025, but the Met Office for all the UK analysed the temperatures across the UK and define a period when midges can complete their extrinsic incubation period, which means that they can become infected after having bit an infected animal. And that information is provided to us on a fortnightly basis as well too, which helps us to determine the risk of local spread once we detect an incursion, and also helps us with our policy approaches in respect to that. And that information has been provided by Pirbright colleagues and the Met Office, which has been a useful tool as well as part of our surveillance and horizon scanning. Happy to move on, Kathy, please. So you've heard a lot about temperature control zones, both in GB, England, and Wales, and in Northern Ireland. I suppose we'll touch a little bit on the Bluetongue disease control framework that we developed, but as a result of our first incursion, we introduced the temperature control zone in Northern Ireland. As you know, moves of all susceptible species on and off were prohibited whilst we carried out investigations, but movements of animals direct to slaughter were permitted under a general licence. We did carry out, we have completed surveillance testing of herds within the 20-kilometre TCZ at this juncture, and that identified the presence of bluetongue in 3 further premises as already been outlined. Next slide, please. So on the 9th of December, as we move through, based on the evidence that we had at hand, and also based on the fact that we at that date we entered the vector inactive period, which means that vectors had ceased to be active in Northern Ireland, and that was using the evidence from our 7 midge traps and on advice from our entomologist from AFBE, Archie Murchie. We were able to declare the vector inactive period, and that meant that we could recommence movements to GB with immediate effect, and also movements of animals into the temperature control zone under general licence were also permitted. Also then, after further review and after assessing the risk that was presented, Saintfield Market, which was located in the TCZ, was able to accept livestock from outside the TCZ from today, and that was announced last Friday, which allowed them to begin operations from today. So that's our temperature control zone at the minute. I think we'd started with a stage where we were calling it 2 temperature control zones. I think we've moved to a position now where, given the overlap, we are sort of recognising this as one zone, and that probably helps with communications, William and colleagues, and helps to understand that it's one area that's under these restrictions at this juncture. Next slide. So the Bluetongue disease control framework is on the DAERA website. I suppose Brian tasked us for this probably was towards the end of 2024 we were tasked with this. I have to say it was probably not the easiest task that I've undertaken, and I know my veterinary colleagues as well. Because Bluetongue is a Category C disease under animal health law, unlike a Category A disease such as even influenza. There are no sort of laid out prescribed actions to take in respect of a Bluetongue outbreak. It is for the competent authority, in conjunction with the stakeholders and industry, to determine the best approach for tackling an incursion in their jurisdiction. And hopefully that's as representative organisations and PVPs and farmers as well too, that's been evidenced in our approach and with the continuing engagement that we've had with all the organisations that are impacted. I will say that the CVO pressed very hard and kept pressing very hard, to define what our approach would be. And I think, whilst it's a challenging disease to deal with, a lot of it depends, William. A lot of it depends on the situation, depends when you find it, where you find it. So what I would say about the disease control framework, it is just that. It is a high-level framework that we recognise, and hopefully through engagement with yourselves and other organisations, that it's a high-level framework that provides a starting point, but that we may need to adapt it as we move through. But that will be in close collaboration with yourselves and other organisations. But it's there for people to look at, and please familiarise yourself. We are broadly aligned at this juncture with it, and we will continue to move through it. But happy to go to the next slide, please. Yeah, just a bit on communications. I suppose for ourselves, this is a fast-moving situation. It's moved very fast the last couple of weeks, and I do appreciate the challenge that presents, particularly for individual farmers, having the right information at the right time. I suppose what I would say for colleagues on the call is we endeavour to ensure that the DAERA website has the latest information, and we endeavour to update that as soon as new information is announced. So that should probably be our first protocol. There is a frequently asked questions on the website, and there's also a trade section on the website. But what I would say as well to colleagues on the call, through yourselves, William, if there's any suggestions that people have, if there's questions that we haven't answered, please send them through, and we'll tackle some of those tonight as well too. But please send them through, and we will ensure that information is put on the website. We traditionally, in disease outbreaks, would have sent letters to herd and flock keepers in zones. A little bit easier for high path AI because there's not as many, albeit that there are quite a few within zones at times. And what we find with this disease, a 20k zone can contain a significant number of holdings. And we have adapted our approach and used a text facility that was previously designed for AI alerts and repurposed that for Bluetongue alerts. And is it perfect? I'm not going to say it's perfect, William, but it's a step in the right direction, and we will continue to develop that so we can ensure that people can get the text message in the zone as soon as possible and be aware of the current situation. And as I say, we've been regularly updating the DAERA website and using our social media channels to give the most appropriate advice as possible. I think that might be me, and we move to Julian, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim, and thanks for the openness to tackle any questions that, even questions beyond tonight. And just on that, I would encourage anyone listening in, if they have a question, to use the Q&A button on their device to put those questions forward, and we'll deal with them towards the end of the webinar. So thank you, Jim. The next one to present now is Julian Henderson, who is going to cover off the trade implications of this disease. Julian, the floor is yours. Or Julian, sorry. You're maybe on mute, Julian, are you?
I wonder if Rachel unmuted. If not, Eve might have to.
Let's see.
It appears that Ian's computer won't come off mute at the moment, so I might have to step in sort of to cover it, so apologies for that. Yes, I work sort of under Julian's, one of the other vets in the trade exports sort of branch. So yes, as has been alluded to, the confirmation of Bluetongue within Northern Ireland unfortunately has a lot of effects on the trade in both live animals and germinal products. So we thought we'd tackle these, sort of looking at the different sort of areas. So first of all, to look at moves to Ireland. So currently under EU legislation, animals can continue to go for direct slaughter to Ireland. There's no requirement for pre-movement testing. However, there is a requirement for pre-notification to DAFM, which is done via the certified vet, via the PVP and an email. Currently, it is not possible for animals to move to Ireland for breeding and production, and it's likely that this will be the case for quite a considerable period of time due to the fact that Ireland currently remains Bluetongue free. Next slide. In terms of moves to GB, as has been mentioned previously, now sort of any sort of animal groups sitting outside of the temporary control zone can now move to GB, and that can be for both breeding production or direct slaughter. We're currently still in discussions with colleagues in GB just to finalise the requirements for moves from within the temporary control zone, but it is hoped that we will have those finalised sort of within the coming weeks and then be able to restart movements from the temporary control zone. Again, as has been alluded to, there are sort of additional requirements which may include sort of pre-movement testing or vaccination, particularly for non-exempt animals. Some animals, for example, some animals going for fattening or slaughter may be exempt, and a lot of these will be based on the conditions required, for example, in Scotland due to their sort of Bluetongue free status at the moment. Next slide, please. So then just looking at live animal moves to the rest of the EU, so other EU member states other than Ireland. Again, moves for direct slaughter are the simplest. They can continue with no requirement for pre-movement testing. The only requirement is that it's not from an actual infected premises, that there's been no case of Bluetongue within the previous 30 days. But it does require 48-hour pre-notification from the exporter to the destination slaughterhouse. Breeding and production may be possible to other member states that are not Bluetongue free. So basically where a member state is Bluetongue free, such as Ireland, it is extremely difficult, close to impossible, to export from an area that isn't Bluetongue free. To member states that are no longer Bluetongue free, it may be possible, particularly where some member states have published what are known as derogations. So this is where they will permit certain types of trade. We have now shared on our website the link to where anybody can look up to see what the Bluetongue status is of any other member state, and also what derogations certain member states may have published. Next slide. I think we have some examples. So this just shows on the link that's on our website, which is an EU webpage. They have links where they show these are the member states that have published potential derogations, and anyone can look those up to see what the derogation is. And what we'd suggest is that anybody who is interested or considering movements for breeding or production to another EU member state, go on there, have a look, discuss it with your PVP. You'll need to work very closely with them to try and see whether you think the move may be possible. And then certainly in trade exports, what we're happy to do then is, if you have a specific question about a specific movement, is to come in as well to give you a bit of backup to look at it to see, to confirm if it looks like it would be possible. Next slide, please. And this is just sort of some examples sort of potential sort of derogations. So animals potentially may be able to move to Spain with very few requirements. That is just to sort of mainland Spain, not to the Spanish islands. And this is because of the presence of BTV 3 in both ourselves and Spain, that were very similar sort of strains of BTV sort of available, or present, sorry, not available. Next slide, which is just a further example, and this just shows where some of these derogations can be quite complicated, And this is why we advise that people, you discuss this very closely with your certifying vet, because it can be a case of really picking through this to try and see exactly what the member state is looking for. It can vary sort of quite a lot. Some of it is based on vaccination. Sometimes that will be a vaccination which is only with a fully authorised vaccine with a known duration of immunity, for which, just as a reminder, the currently available BTV3 vaccines that are available in Europe do not have a known duration of immunity, so therefore cannot be used for some forms of trade certification. And one thing to note is that, for example, Netherlands has this clause written in their derogation that says no conditions are set for BTV3 or BTV12. This can be slightly confusing because it's not actually clear whether they mean that therefore there's no conditions needed if you have BTV3, or if they don't allow any derogation if you have BTV3. So sometimes it's not the clearest even to us. And this is a sort of area where we certainly are happy to help if somebody wants to explore an export option by potentially even doing things like contacting the member state in question to clarify exactly what their requirements are. But one thing that we would point out, as you can imagine, with cases like that where we may need to seek clarification, it's not the sort of thing that could be sorted overnight. So the more time we have, knowing in advance of when people might want to export, the more time that gives to try and figure out what might be required and if it will be possible. So that's just sort of to give some example of just the types of derogations that are available, and certainly it would be worth exploring for anybody that considers that moves to other EU member states may be helpful to them. Next slide. And then just a little bit about germinal products. As Ignatius mentioned right at the start, unfortunately, bluetongue can be spread through the movement of germinal products, and this is why there are a lot of controls in place. Currently within Northern Ireland, anyone outside of the temporary control zone, the normal movement requirements sort of continue as pre-bluetongue. If you're in the restricted zone and you want to move germinal product out to the free zone, this does require a general licence, and some test requirements may be applied if this product was collected after the 30th of September of this year, which is when we sort of consider the risk period to be for the spread of it, which is why additional testing is required for that date. Currently, movement from, from outside of the control zone into the restricted zone does not require any specific sort of movement requirements, but we do sort of advise that as these things can change, as the disease picture changes, we advise you always to keep checking the website, which we endeavour to keep updated. Next slide, please. And this is just sort of, there's a lot of information on this, but this is all again on the sort of website, but partly it's just to highlight that this is complicated. Movements both to the EU and to GB are complicated because different requirements apply depending on whether you're within the temporary control zone or outside of it, and also depending on when the product was collected. And this is due to a combination of our efforts to control and agreements with GB and also EU legislation. So, and again, we sort of always encourage, if anybody's not sure and wants clarification, please do get in touch with us through our Trade Exports email. We will always endeavour to try to answer queries as quickly as possible. In terms of the exports to the rest of the world, so to countries beyond sort of GB and the EU, that really is on a case-by-case basis, depending on each third country's specific requirements. And again, if anybody's not sure whether they can meet those requirements, do please get in touch and we'll certainly look at those individually for you. I think that is the end of our trade slides now. Just we want to double check. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Eva. It's a bit of a challenge when you have to step in at short notice like that, but it's well covered, so thank you. Now we're moving on to Dr. Melanie Spahn-Holmes, who is a private practitioner, and Melanie's going to sort of lay out our options around vaccinations and how this might help us deal with this disease going forward. So, Melanie, the floor is yours.
I'm just going to start sorry, William. Sorry, that's my fault. I didn't I didn't brief you properly. Sorry.
You're okay.
Apologies. So I will just start a little bit on the department position on vaccination, and then I'm going to hand over to Melanie, who will give much more detail and much more informative information than I will. I suppose from a departmental perspective, people are maybe aware that Bluetongue vaccination, has not been permitted in Northern Ireland ever, and I think it was in recognition of the challenge that we faced right across the EU and GB that the Minister took a decision in July of this year to put in place a process for BTV3 vaccination to be used in Northern Ireland. So there are currently 3 BTV3 vaccines available, and Melanie will touch much more on that. I think it's important in respect of the process and for colleagues on the call here is that they understand PVPs themselves must apply to the department for a license to obtain, store and prescribe BTV3 vaccine. And then livestock keepers must also apply for a specific license to vaccinate their animals and provide us with detailed information on the animals that they wish to prescribe that they wish to vaccinate. And there are reporting requirements. And I know, William, that farmers will, and like myself, would say, why do you need all this information? I suppose there's a couple of reasons that we need this information. It's to provide assurance to colleagues, right across this island, but also in GB as well, too, that we can identify vaccinated animals, make sure that we understand which animals are vaccinated, as that aids with our surveillance. And vaccinated animals cannot be included in any surveillance as we move forward towards any recovery or exit strategy from this disease. So, that's important as well too. And I think where we are as a department is, we recognise that vaccination is another tool. It's one tool within the toolbox in respect of all diseases, and deciding to vaccinate as the bottom line there, is a matter for herd and flock keepers to determine in consultation with their private veterinary practitioner. And on that nice segue, I'll hand over to a private veterinary practitioner to take us through some of the considerations that might take place in that discussion. Thanks, Melanie.
Hiya. So we're going to talk a wee bit about vaccination there. First of all, why, what does vaccination do? What could it help with? Ignatius was telling us all about the signs. So you've got fever, depression, facial swelling, nasal discharge, maybe eye signs, red swollen eyes, around the hoof, the skin, lameness, respiratory disease. You can have abortions. You've got deformed calves, all sorts of signs. And there's ones that don't show any signs. You have to remember that too. It all depends on how the virus has taken action within the animal that it has infected. Okay, so the vaccination would help against the severe clinical signs and the impact that has on the health of your animal and its productivity. So dairy cows can have a high fever and a milk drop. The vaccine will help against that. Younger cattle might show respiratory signs, and sheep as well, or lameness. Vaccine can help against that. It might not take all the signs away, because there is no vaccine that works 100%. Neither does Bluetongue vaccine. So you have to remember those things. That will help. It will not take. It can massively reduce those clinical signs and therefore help your animals. If you vaccinate, you also have to remember an animal can still be infected even if it is vaccinated, but it will then hopefully help not transmit as much. If a midge then bites it, you might not get that full, a lot of midges then infecting a lot of more animals if they have bitten that animal that has been vaccinated. So vaccination helps, okay? It's not the 100% solution, but it will definitely help if there is outbreaks there. There's 3 different vaccines. There's Bluetongue 3, which you can inject cattle and sheep from a month old onwards, the animals. You've got Bluevac. It's 2 months, from 2 months onwards, and Cefalzol is from 3 months onwards. All 3 have been used. Bluetongue has been mostly used on mainland UK at the moment. I think it is partly because you can start the vaccination at such a young age. It's also the lowest dose. It's 1 ml, where the other 2 vaccines you are injecting more of the vaccine. All 3 vaccines, sheep only have to get 1 vaccine initially. Cattle have to be vaccinated twice, 3 weeks apart. Boostering wise, for coming year, if you've done your primary course, the only one that has data at the moment on that there is the Cefalzol. You definitely have to then, if you want to keep on protecting your animals, you need to booster a year later. You just need to 1 injection then. Their Bluetongue and Cefalzol, or Bluevac, they haven't really got a lot of data about it. They're talking about between 6 months and 12 months, but nothing on the data sheet as yet regarding this. The big question is obviously, should you vaccinate? I think that depends from farm to farm, and it's something that you have to discuss with your own vet that knows your farm. It also depends on weather conditions. If we get a really warm spring and we get loads of midges, that might be a reason to vaccinate. It's very, very hard to know. And again, it all depends where you're at in Northern Ireland. So again, discussion with your own vet. If you are for exporting to mainland GB, you definitely need to discuss it. Eve was saying that you need very likely, well, you might need vaccinating depending where you're going, and you might need blood testing depending where you're going. So again, a discussion to have with your own vet. So if you decide with your vet to vaccinate, you need to let the vet know that you want to vaccinate, because they have to get a permit to get the vaccine in. And you have to let the department know that you are going to vaccinate. And so if you're vaccinating all your animals, you have to let them know that you're vaccinating them all. If you're only, say for export purposes, are vaccinating breeding bulls or something like that, then you need just to have those numbers ready for the department. Timing of vaccination, you should ideally vaccinate before the warmer summer months or spring months. It just all depends here. You just don't know what the weather is going to be like. But if it is warming up and you are planning on vaccinating, then rather earlier, just before the warmer season is starting and whenever the midges get very, very active. So as I say, you need to follow the protocol. You cannot go and say with cattle, I am just going to give them 1 vaccine and that will do. Then you're probably wasting your money. So do it right. With sheep, obviously you only have to give 1 vaccine, but it does take 3 weeks. They know that it takes 3 weeks for onset of immunity. So keep that in mind as well. I think whenever we're talking vaccination, it is, very, very hard for us at this moment in time to say, should you not? Yeah, obviously, if you know you're going to export animals, you can look into this. Again, you need to discuss with your vet. They know your farm best. They know exactly where you're at. They will be able to give you more answers regarding vaccination. And if you are vaccinating, let the vet know, apply for the permit with the department, and do it properly. That would be my advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That was very helpful. Hey, we're moving on now to the questions part of this, and Jim, you're going to field these questions and take charge of this element of the webinar.
I'm going to try my best, William. I did have a chat with William beforehand and asked would there be much engagement for the questions and did I need to prepare any in advance in case there was, but he reliably assured me, and it's played out exactly that way, that there's a wide range of subjects in the questions here. So like I said, we will try and get through as many as we can tonight. I will try and direct them to the right people, but if all people are on the panel as well too, please feel free to jump in as well, as long as that's okay, William. I think we have good expertise here right across the panel. I suppose we're going to start off with one around the TCZ. There's been a theme there around, moves within the TCZ, moves from the TCZ, and how long that the TCZ might last. I might ask David Kyle if he's there, maybe to start off on that one, and I can maybe pitch in as well too. If David's there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
we allowed moves into the zone there. Was it last week, Jim? So animals allowed to move into the zone, and it was really important to let people in the zone carry on with economic activity as quickly as possible. Now, moves out of the zone are going to be a little bit more difficult, and that's why, of course, we've been progressing that with a little bit more caution. We've been doing the surveillance testing in the zone over the last couple of weeks. We've done well over 50 herds now at this stage, and the lab have processed maybe 5,500 odd samples for us. And we're reaching a point in our conclusion that, we certainly haven't found all the infection that's there. If we had, we'd have had to do an awful lot more testing, but our statistics would model and say that we've got about 10%. We think about 10% of the herds in the zone will probably have some evidence of infection. So movements out of the zone, the minister is currently considering, and there may well be an announcement in the next few days on that, but he's thinking about that situation very, very carefully. If movements are to proceed outside the zone, there are certain risk animals that will need to be tested, and those animals will be breeding bulls or breeding rams, because they can be infected with the disease and pass on infection. And I think the evidence from England, as Gordon was reflecting on, there have been situations where bulls have been infertile and causing quite significant problems as well in herds. And I would say that probably goes for rams too, even though we're at the end of the breeding season for sheep. But breeding bulls would be quite a big risk, and we'd want those to test negative before we'd let them go. And also, pregnant animals pregnant cows, of course, would be a big risk. So, if we let those go, they would need to be testing negative, both for evidence of the virus itself or any reaction to the virus. So any animals that would test positive, they wouldn't be allowed to leave the zone. And we're very much in containment phase of this. We know infection is in Northern Ireland. We know we're not going to be able to stop it spreading eventually, but at the moment we're trying to contain it for as long as it's feasibly possible. So does that answer the question, Jim?
Yeah, I think maybe just to add that, I suppose, I think one of the main questions here will be too as well is how long is the TCZ going to last? I suppose David has addressed some of that in that, in permitting moves under certain conditions, that will help to alleviate some of the pressure for people that are within that TCZ. I think as David has said, is that we're nearing that sort of surveillance stage. And I suppose with complete honesty, we'll be working through this with industry, with representative organisations like the EFU and our private veterinary practitioners to find a way forward in respect to this. I think there would be a case to be made around, some additional surveillance. There's no decisions in this, but some additional surveillance around the age areas of the TCZ. Bearing in mind, we're also still continuing with our abattoir surveillance, which is still ongoing, which provides us another level of information, and that decisions in removing the TCZ will be taking, at the right time. We don't really want to keep it in place any longer than we have to, recognising some of the impact it might have. So we will continue to work with colleagues and on the evidence that we have, and ensure that any measures that are in place are proportionate to the benefits, and ensuring that the impacts are minimised, as David has said, by progressing through various relaxations for certain types of moves. I think the only one, David, you probably missed as well too was that, and maybe you did say it, but was animals direct to slaughter have been permitted from the beginning as well to under general license, which hopefully provides some alleviation from impacts that movement controls would have.
There's one other important point to make too, Jim, I suppose, is the Poro Mart in the middle of this same field, unfortunately encompassed within the zone, and for the last couple of weeks had not been able to operate. So we're glad this week they were able to open again. Encourage people to support that market. At the moment, they're only able to trade in animals from outside of the zone, provided they're going out of the zone again. And of course, when the situation changes in relation to the movements of animals out of the zone, then hopefully they'll be able to restore their familiar trade. But markets play a very important part in our community, and encourage people to support Mr. Murphy down there and ensure that he can try and recover some of the lost opportunities that he's had in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. We'll maybe move on now. I think, Melanie, your session on vaccination has sparked a range of questions, and maybe try and collate some of them, and maybe if you want to start, and then other colleagues might be able to jump on as well too. So some themes being picked up in respect of vaccinating pregnant animals, any risk associated with that?
No,
does that convey?
It's safe to use. It's safe to use in pregnant animals. So,
and does it convey any protection then to the progeny as well? Was another question that was asked.
There's not enough data. They feel it helps that animals that have been vaccinated in other countries. They say it does help, but they haven't got enough data to confirm that, to put that on the data sheet at the moment. But it is safe to give in to pregnant animals.
And then there was another question around duration of immunity of the vaccine as well.
Yeah, so the Silvalzol does last a year. The other two vaccines have no data at the moment. They're talking about revaccinating within 6 months to a year, but again, they haven't got enough data to confirm this at the moment. So,
and then probably the question that's on everybody's mind is probably cost, Melanie. I don't know how much you can say or want to say about or can say about it, but
I think it depends, obviously, from practice to practice. I think there seems to be sort of prices going around just below £3 per dose, so it's hard to give it just a bulk figure of £3. There might be practices that have it cheaper. There might be practices that have it dearer. But I think that has been sort of mentioned around that, that price. As it's a hard one to, to say something about really, give exact money. But I think if you count for about £3 a dose, that would be my advice.
I think the best thing we could probably say is that, if farmers are thinking about vaccinating, please, at the earliest, consult with your PVP and understand, your conditions on your holding and discuss costs with your.
There's going to be a difference if you're on the top of the Sperrin or the Mourne Mountains or at the bottom, So, or if you're in Bangor or in Fermanagh at the moment. So I'd definitely talk to your own vet about this and what is the best way forward for your farm.
Okay. And then not for you, you'll be glad, Melanie, but still on vaccination, a little bit maybe for Gillian or Eve. I suppose it's a little bit around vaccinated animals and any trade impacts. So can vaccinated animals move to the ROI? Can they move through Scotland and the GB? Just maybe a general sort of feeling, Gillian, sorry, around vaccination.
I'll take that, Jim. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so apologies, folks. I got chucked out of the meeting twice trying to turn on my microphone. Yeah, vaccination really has a very limited effect on the potential for trade. It may reduce the need for pre-movement testing if you are moving animals out of a zone. But that obviously is a very limited potential for us at the minute. The other occasions where it may be helpful is in some of those countries that have issued derogations that include the ability to receive animals that have been vaccinated. But just vaccinating your animals will not enable you to move them to the Republic of Ireland. It won't open up any particular markets in GB, but it may reduce the amount that you have to test. There is a general license for moves from zones into Scotland. And if you have a look at it, you'll see that the animals normally have to be pre-movement tested. But if they are fully vaccinated with one particular vaccine, the requirement for pre-movement testing is removed. So yeah, it's not a panacea whenever it comes to export being vaccinated. You're more doing it for the reasons that Melanie outlined to protect your animals.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here.
Sorry, to add one, I don't think we've covered off. I did see there was a question about does vaccinating affect the movement for direct slaughter to Ireland? No. So vaccination, as these vaccines are all safe to be used in animals entering the food chain, they have no effect, either positive or negative. So you don't need to vaccinate to move for direct slaughter, but equally trying to move an animal that was vaccinated, that's not going to have any effect on your ability to move to direct slaughter. Just add that as well.
Okay, thanks, Eve. Going to maybe turn to Ignatius if he's there. The question on Ignatius, will positive animals be culled or why not? And then there was a linked question around compensation. I'll pick up the compensation element of it if you want to talk about the disease control measure of culling or not.
Yeah, I suppose more or less we have to look at why do you want to cull an animal, and I suppose really the two questions we have to ask is if we cull that animal, will that reduce the amount of infection in the locality? And we've decided, based on what we've seen in the restricted zone, that because of the number of animals infected, there is a strong possibility that the midges are infected. So therefore, culling those animals will not reduce the amount of infection in the area. And as I say, that's the reason why we decided not to cull in this circumstance.
On the compensation question, and I think there is, there's some linked rationale in that, culling animals, as Ignatius said, from a disease control perspective, has limited benefit, and therefore our 1981 order provides a compensation level of only 50%, recognising that it would not be a primary disease control measure going forward. That is our statutory obligation within Schedule 2 of the 1981 order. I suppose we can move on a little bit as well too. Don't know whether this is one for Ignatius and maybe Julian can pitch in as well too, because we have a number of questions in this from various areas around the risk presented by imported straw. and from areas such as mainland EU, and what risk that presents in respect of potentially containing infectious midges.
Yeah. I suppose, Jim, yes, we have looked at this particular question, in relation to the movement of straw, and we've considered that the risk is very low to negligible. And the rationale behind that is, first of all, the straw is coming from a cereal field. The cereal fields are not attractive to midges. So basically, the chances of getting midges in the middle of a cereal field is pretty small. So that deals with that particular part of the risk. The next part of the risk then basically is the movement of the straw bales from the cereal field to Northern Ireland. And again, as I say, similar arguments arrive in that straw of itself is not attractive to midges. So therefore, there's no particular reason why midges would want to light on straw bales as they're travelling through, an infected area. So for those reasons, we consider that the movement of straw basically presents a very low to negligible risk, and that's both from GB and from mainland Europe as well.
Okay, we move to Pilar as well. If Pilar's there, I suppose there's some questions around GB, particularly around cases of abortion or deformed calves, and the level that has been experienced in GB respect that, and is there an assessment that vaccination has had an impact?
Yeah, early to say, really, and also the uptake of vaccination is not great at the moment. But certainly, there are encouraging reports from the Netherlands on the protective effect of vaccination up to a point of the reduction of the severity of clinical signs. We have seen these reproductive problems. We saw them last season, and we are starting to see this season. We have had bulls testing positive. They were tested as a private test because of the poor conception rates in the herd. We have seen aborted cows becoming positive to tests. We have seen stillbirth material becoming positive, and this is why Gordon mentioned we're bracing ourselves for another season of dummy calves in January. Whether the vaccination has had a positive effect at mitigating the more severe consequences. The jury is out at the moment, but we monitor whether the herds have been vaccinated or not when they come positive. That's one of the things that we ask for, and we will be analysing that in due course.
Okay, we look forward to that information, and it's I think it's useful for us in Northern Ireland. That yes, we're perhaps a year or two behind, but I think we can learn a lot from the GB experience, and we're thankful for the engagement across. I suppose I have a question here, David Kyle's there, in respect of a query being raised around farms testing negative that have undergone testing not being informed. Are you able to address that at this juncture?
Look, I think it really is important that all the farms that have volunteered and helped with the surveillance testing are informed of their results, and certainly it's something we'll take on forward. I know I'm pretty sure now virtually all the testing is completed. We're still awaiting one or two results from our reference laboratory, but certainly we will make sure that, certainly by the end of the week, that any of the farms that have been tested are told of their results. I suppose one thing maybe you could almost assume at this stage is that if you have heard nothing, then it's good news, because we would have told you already if you're positive. So as a general rule, that's probably the case. But look, I'm sure someone from the department will be in contact with you.
Yeah, but I think it's a fair enough challenge as well too. I think we have been working at pace over recent weeks as well, and dealing with a new situation and a new evolving disease. And but I think we take that as a fair enough challenge from colleagues on the call. I suppose one here, Ignatius, and for other veterinary colleagues, if they want to jump in as well too. Is it this inevitable now that it will spread to the ROI? And given that the island of Ireland is a single epidemiological unit, is that a foregone conclusion, I suppose?
Well,
I would say yes. There's been no country so far been infected by this disease that have eradicated it. It was really interesting to see Gordon's presentation, and you may see that in Wales they rapidly succumbed to infection. From the introduction of zones to having to accept that the whole country was infected. The other story that it painted to me was that very much towards the end of the year, in the autumn time, that seems to be an acceleration of when the disease happens. If there's no good time to get this disease, but I think of all the times in the year, I suppose this would be the best time of the year to have detected it, to have thought that none of our animals have had clinical signs of it. We do think that has spread further than the zones exist at the moment, but we just haven't detected it yet. And just as a rough rule of thumb, we did some modelling on a kind of an intensive area of livestock, and similar to the size of a zone, on an average between maybe 16 to 30 odd thousand animals would move out of an area like that in the time frame that we think that this disease has first come to our shore. So that gives an indication of the potential for how and where disease has spread in Northern Ireland. We just don't have any evidence for it at the moment. So, I would just caution on the fact of thinking that it's in that small zone at the moment. That's where we think it is. And that's where we've got evidence of it. But I'd be worried that it is elsewhere. And it may already be in the south of Ireland, only they just haven't picked it up yet.
Okay, so there's a bit here. We bring Gordon in, and I'll touch on it as well too. It's a bit on BTV in general. I think we'll go back to Ignatius's very start. I suppose we need to remember that there's 24 serotypes here. So there's a bit on the notifiable status of BTV. It's listing as a Category C disease under Animal Health Law, which I can touch a bit on, and what the future of it might be. So I don't know, Gordon, you want to touch on some of that first, and I can come in.
Well, I think Ignatius explained that there are effectively 24 different diseases. So whilst we might look to live with Bluetongue 3 and potentially Bluetongue 8, depending on circumstances, I certainly wouldn't, from an England perspective, want to say that we're just going to roll over if we were to get Bluetongue 1 or Bluetongue 4, for example. So I think we have to treat them separately. Whilst they are spread in the same midges, Bluetongue 12 didn't spread through the Netherlands, hasn't spread in England. So I think the jury's out. That said, I think probably Bluetongue 3 is here to stay for a long time.
Yeah, I suppose we are aware as well too of. The picture across mainland EU is quite stark in respect of Bluetongue 3 and some other serotypes as well. Bluetongue, under the Animal Health Law, was already reclassified. It would have been, in old money, under the directives, would have been a Category A disease. But the Animal Health Law analysed all the criteria associated with why a competent authority should intervene in the disease, and decided to be a Category C disease, and that's optional eradication. And that is for the competent authority to decide in conjunction with the stakeholders what measures are to be taken in response to an incursion, and how much effort should be put into eradication. We are aware that there are ongoing conversations at Commission level in respect to that classification. And it would be no surprise if there was a further reclassification to a category disease, given the level of spread that has been experienced across mainland EU. So, but similar to Gordon, I think from a Northern Ireland and an island of Ireland perspective, I think yes, we may get to a stage where, as David Cal's pointed out, that we live with BTV3, but there are other serotypes out there, and we would, of course, be responding to those because the key thing here is, and Gillian will speak to this probably, the key thing here around vaccination, even to enable in trade, is that vaccination must be for serotypes that have been detected in your jurisdiction within the last 2 years. So there is a challenge there, even around vaccination and what it opens up for trade. So, for example, Gordon and England and GB have experienced BTV 12. So that has started that clock ticking again in respect of, and there are no BTV 12 vaccinations as far as I understand. So their clock to restart trade is started ticking again from that detection of BTV 12. So yeah, it's a very complicated picture and very hard to decipher, particularly around vaccination and its impact on trades. Sort of picking up some more questions here now. Then, Julian, I suppose another one, Julian. Then, would an all Northern Ireland RZ, if that's the position that we got to, if we move to, and this is probably more of an import question, but which is not fair on yourself, but as well too, would that open up moves from GB to NI at this juncture?
So moves from GB to NI are governed by the EU legislation on imports, and the presence in particular of the BTV 12 there is going to prohibit those imports per se. So no, that wouldn't enable us to import animals from GB.
Okay, some questions there too as well around financial assistance for people within the zones. We have talked a little bit about our next steps and our direction of travel in respect to that. I mean, I think the Minister has been quite clear that at this juncture there is no that there is no financial assistance in respect to this. The department is focusing on surveillance, is focusing on understanding the level and extent of spread, and then assessing that information to ensure we can release those restrictions as soon as it is deemed safe, and putting measures in place where there are higher risk animals in respect to that. So there are ongoing conversations around that and ongoing decisions to be made, and the Minister hopes to be in a position in the coming days to make further announcements in respect to that. But David, do you want to add anything to that, David?
I would just say that, in the last few days, William and his high executive team have been meeting with Brian, Chief Veterinary Officer, and putting a petition strongly for some form of assistance, especially for the farmers that are in the zone. That we as officials have been progressing advice to the Minister on that, governed by the rules around public expenditure. And as all farmers know, the purse strings are very tight at the moment, and the bar is set very high in terms of what government can or cannot provide. But the final decision will always rest with the Minister. So we will just have to wait and see how that lands in the coming days. But William has certainly been putting his arguments and made his voice very clear on those. And William, I'm sure you want to say a few words on that too.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, no, our team have been making that case strongly, and as Julian has said, it lies with the Minister now. The discussion is not over yet, and we can't second guess it, but we're definitely on that case.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Melanie. A couple more probably on vaccination. My thing just moved now too. So, Melanie, would you advise vaccinating sooner rather than later? I think you touched on this again, but I mean, I suppose if you want to maybe just recap on, is it sooner rather than later, or is it better to wait until closer to the risk period?
I think you probably are talking closer to the risk period, unless you're obviously exporting animals and there is special requirements for it. But yeah, again, if you're wanting to protect your animals, you're going to try to give it before the midges become active. right? And if they're biting and they're transmitting disease, you want your animals at that stage protected. So if that's what you're inclined to do, then you're probably talking very early spring. The problem, I think, is that except for the Silvalzil, that we know that you have to booster a year later, that we haven't got that data for the other two. And if you look at all three vaccines, the Bultavo seems to be the one that has been working the best. It's really hard for me to go and say that because I haven't experienced it myself, but I'm going from, there was a symposium in Germany about Bluetongue, and Bultavo did come out as the better vaccine against the type 3. So on that point, but there also isn't yet an awful lot of data there. You know, how long does it last? You wanted them to last through the season as well, that the midges are active. So that's sort of where the discussion with your vet comes in, you know. So is there a lot of midges in your area where you're exactly at? You know, that's going to be, you're going to have to be looking at every wee aspect of it. Now, if you say, right, well, I just want to protect my animals, that's fair enough. You know, just do it then at the right time, you know. So, and that's the discussion you have with your vet then.
There was a couple more there on withdrawal period for the vaccine.
Yeah. Doesn't seem
I don't believe there's any withdrawal
no
period
withdrawal
on the vaccine.
No, they are inactivated.
No.
Yeah. Thank
There's
you.
no,
And
none.
another one as well. Sorry, Melanie, but I suppose they do, as I say, attendees at this are obviously keen for information on vaccination, and we will take some of these questions away and have them on our FAQ as well. But if the situation continues and no clinical signs, is there any need to vaccinate if not moving animals?
The problem is there's no clinical signs. You know, I think that's the worst situation really, because a midge bites this cow with no clinical signs and is spreading and is flying around, you know. So that's sort of, I think, you know, as proven with the ones in Bangor, there's no clinical signs in those animals, you know, and it is there, you know. So we're just you know, that is sort of, do you vaccinate? So there was very little clinical signs in some of the cases in GB, but I know from friends of mine that work mainland GB, England, and they were talking cows with, you know, whenever they went back looking at the data, there was a milk drop. There was maybe cows that had a high fever, but they hadn't at that stage suspected that was actually done by Bluetongue. It only appeared later on that those cows had deformed calves. Whenever the calf went to the lab, it comes out as Bluetongue, you know. So the signs itself were missed initially. That's sort of a thing that does need to be thought about, you know, because everybody goes and says, right, well, you know, those animals didn't show any signs, so it's not dangerous. Yeah, if they don't show signs, that's great. But the problem is there that you might have a cow that aborts or has a deformed fetus so many months later, you know. So it is a really hard one. You know,
maybe going to bring Pilar in. She's got her hand up there. He wants to add the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. But we have also seen very severe consequences for individual animals. So we had one of the poor cases, the second one with BTV8, actually. It was a cow that had calved on the 18th of September. Then a few weeks later, was a report case because for 3 consecutive days was found as a downer cow in the yard, and it was positive for Bluetongue. I mean, so we have had also a single lamb infected in a farm, but they had to be put down. So in the majority of cases, we don't see these dramatic consequences, at least at this stage. Bearing in mind, we're already seeing abortions and things, but I totally agree with Melanie. But we have also seen some individual cases where animals have had very severe consequences.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here, a practical question as well, to maybe Ignatius can help me with it, around how do we test for BTV and how accurate are those tests?
Okay, thanks, Jim. Yes, I suppose really the normal test for Bluetongue is a blood test. We take 2 types of blood, clotted blood and EDTA. So that's a purple top for those of you that know these things. The serological test is looking for antibodies, so the serological clotted test is looking for antibodies in the presence of those. And the EDTA sample is used for PCR testing, which is looking for the presence of virus or virus fragments. So those are the type of testing that we carry out. Also, whenever we've already talked about fetuses and tissues going to the lab, they can also be tested for Bluetongue as well. And again, they can use a PCR test for, on tissues to test for Bluetongue.
Okay.
I would just add, Ignatius, that whenever we get a positive result here in our lab in AFBI, those samples are then sent to reference laboratories. So we have to send them to both the European and the UK reference laboratories, which take that sample and they'll retest it again. And they'll confirm. That's when we say we've got confirmation of the disease, when our reference laboratory have said, yes, you're absolutely correct, AFBI, those samples were correctly identified as positive. So, by the time we're publishing it, for sure, we've got a problem.
There's a question, and maybe David, Kyle, you can pick up on it, and others can chip in as well too. I think some of the information that Melanie's provided us helps to answer that, but just to reaffirm, are vaccinated animals less likely to transmit to abiding midges, therefore reducing spread?
I think some of the vaccines do claim that they reduce viremia. So if they do reduce viremia, then they will reduce the spread by the biting midge. So I would, and everything, all the instincts in me would say yes, vaccines would help to reduce would reduce spread. Yes, I don't think they claim to remove the clinical signs in all cases, but it will reduce the general load of virus. And Melanie, you jump in and correct me if I'm wrong there. I think that's the story.
All 3 vaccines actually claim to reduce viremia, but you're right in saying that it reduces the viremia, it reduces the clinical signs, and it reduces, according to the data sheet, it does say reduce then of transmitting more disease as well, but it's not 100%, so.
I think, sorry, it's Gordon here as well. It's also worth reminding ourselves of the position in Belgium and the Netherlands. So the Netherlands, obviously, they've had quite a lot of disease, but they've also had very extensive vaccination, and they've not had a case this year. And Belgium introduced a mandatory vaccination program, and again, that very significantly reduced the amount of spread. So I think there's evidence from the practical aspects of vaccination as well, that it reduces spread.
Another one for you, Ignatius. I know we've talked a lot about midges, and once we recognise that they're the primary driver for disease transmission, so I think there's a question really to recap on the animal routes. as well too of transmission, please?
Yeah, there's two main methods that the disease is spread from animal to animal. The one is by germinal products. So that is why there are controls on the movement of germinal products from Bluetongue restricted areas. The other then is in utero. Again, whenever a cow or a sheep becomes infected during pregnancy, there are several possible consequences to that. The first thing is you get a fairly embryonic death depending on the stage of pregnancy. The second stage is that you can get these malformed or weak calves born, and then some of them will go to full term. On some occasions, these animals will contain virus, will be infective, and that is where we consider that overwintering of the virus takes place, and this transplacental spread.
Okay. Just bear with me a second. Sorry, I've lost my
about needles as well.
Yeah, the one about needles, yeah. So sorry, Eve, go ahead.
Yes, so funny, that was the one that I'd spotted, and it's like Melanie or Ignatius can correct me, but yes, there was a question about was there a risk of it being spread by using the same needle between animals, and I do remember, I think, a presentation from a vet in the Netherlands saying they did think that was a potential risk. So my understanding is, yes, it'll spread from animal is a potential risk, but
yes.
Others may correct me.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. There is a potential to be spread by needles if good hygiene isn't taken between animals. So again, the advice would be use single-use needles whenever you're injecting animals.
I have a question here on have any midges in the traps been tested, and have they tested positive for BTV3? I know we have looked at this with our entomologist Archie Murchie from AFBI, but I'll maybe ask you, Ignatius, maybe to cover that off if you can.
Yeah, well, first of all, we haven't checked the midges for the presence of virus. The number of midges which are actually infected with the virus is relatively small. They're not very efficient spreaders, although because of the numbers involved, basically, they can spread the disease. So actually testing the midges, as I say, isn't a particularly useful way to try and determine the disease. The live animal is the most effective route of finding the disease.
And I mean, just to say, we've discussed this with our experts in Pirbright, and they say, yes, it can be done, but a negative test doesn't mean it's negative. A positive done is. So actually, as Ignatius says, test the animal is the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I suppose, just to reinforce that point, the animal actually concentrates the virus, whereas, it's dispersed through the midge population. And I suppose the other aspect of it is the number of midges that you're catching in a trap, as a proportion of the overall population of midges, is relatively small as well.
One here, maybe it's David Kyle, or how will vaccinated animals be tested to allow moves out of the TCZ?
Well, I'll start, Jim, if you wish. As I said earlier on, there's two tests that we use. One is looking for antibodies. The other is the PCR, which is looking for virus. So if an animal is vaccinated, we will check that animal. If an animal is vaccinated and is positive to serology, well, then we will check that animal with PCR to determine if there is virus present.
And if there isn't virus present, then the animal will be able to go.
Yeah, but that's something. I mean, I think we're finalising those steps and those requirements, and hopefully we're making further announcements for those moves, both within and out with the TCZ. David, I'm hoping in a position, within the next day or so to be making those announcements. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, no, that's correct. I mean, the point is that, once an animal has recovered and doesn't have virus in their system anymore, then, as we've said before, they're very safe. They're a quite valuable animal, I would guess. They've recovered from Bluetongue. So, we'd be hoping to make some further decisions on this in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and caveat, sorry, Jim, just to put the caveat on, provided the animal isn't pregnant.
Yeah. So, question here around the surveillance that's been conducted in the ROI. I suppose I can start, and then maybe some others might pick up on the information. What I would say is, as with our colleagues in GB in England, Scotland, and Wales, we work very closely with our colleagues across the ROI. We have been monitoring. We've had already two full-day workshops with our colleagues, and particularly in respect of the movements north and south in the event of an incursion in either jurisdiction. And that was obviously very valuable whenever we came to our first case, because a lot of those questions had already been answered, and a lot of positions had already been agreed in respect to that, and understanding of the impacts of an incursion in either jurisdiction. I do understand that they do a level of abattoir surveillance, and they would have been at a certain level to maintain their freedom with the EU. I know that they've increased that, and that they will have a requirement now also, given that they fall within 100. The vast majority of the ROI, or a significant portion of the ROI, will fall within 150k from our cases, so they will be required to increase their surveillance along those sort of border counties. But they've also been doing sentinel herd surveillance in the southeast of Ireland as well, acknowledging that yes, there is risk from England and Wales, but there's also risk from northern France, where there is 148 as well too present. So obviously colleagues in the ROI are conscious of that and are doing that surveillance. Just wonder if there's any other questions there that people want to pick up at now. I'm going to flick through here. Anything from your perspective, William, that you want us to address at this? I suppose there was one there around, and this is probably one of those questions for the panel. Does maybe start with David Kyle, and then maybe Pilar might want to come in as well too. Is it inevitable that BTV3 will become endemic in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I think I probably mentioned that earlier on. I mean, we look at all the other countries that have become infected by BTV3, and there hasn't been any country so far that we're aware of that's managed to eradicate BTV3. So at the moment, it's very much containment exercise and hoping that the disease doesn't spread quickly across the country.
Yes, I agree. To become free, they will have to do extensive surveillance, even the ones that have not had cases reported this year, like the Netherlands, probably because of the high degree of immunity, either from recovered animals or vaccinated ones. The jury is out if they start testing whether they will be truly free or not. There could be masked cases. So yeah, I'm not aware. Spain managed to have a freedom from Bluetongue, some serotypes in the islands, but even in mainland, when they had an eradication plan, they had to abandon it because the serotype 1 or 4 they had in southern Spain, Andalusia, and I think it was 4 escaped that region. So that kind of threw the whole plan in disarray, and they have abandoned eradication.
I think what we might see is that you get waves of infection. So a little bit like Schmallenberg and things like that. You'll get 2 or 3 bad years, then you'll get less bad years, and then it'll come back again. So I think that is the definition of endemic, but you might get sort of surges where you get really bad years.
There's been a question, another question around compensation. I suppose, William, I'll just maybe clarify that before I bring you in, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Or as chair, you can jump in any time, obviously. From a compensation perspective, so the question asked about compensation for infected animals. So compensation is only payable whenever the department would cull an animal for disease control measures, and where it's proportionate in respect of the benefit to disease control measures. So just maybe clarify that point. And there was another point, probably a good point as well, too, thinking about shows coming up, in the spring and summer, and what will the advice for shows be at that juncture? I suppose the CVO Brian hates me saying it depends, but I think it will depend on the situation that we find ourselves coming into the spring and summer, in respect of the disease. If we were to experience disease along the east coast again, and maybe somewhere in the middle towards the west, then that becomes a very valid position to move to the England and Wales position of a all country RZ. And at that position, then what you're saying is that you're at a point of living with the disease, and that there would be no restriction on movements to shows and things like that. But I mean, that it depends on where we find ourselves, and we will keep in close contact with the likes of the UFU and all organisations in respect of any decisions or advice in respect of shows, markets, and so on and so forth moving forward. William?
Thanks, Jim. I have two questions. The first one is, how significant is it that as yet we've had no animals with clinical symptoms? And the second question is, I'm picking up here that it is unusual for 44 cases on one farm. Like, I'd just be interested in Gordon's. Has there been anything similar to that level of infection in any GB farm?
I'll pick up the second one, and Pilar can also come in if I get stuck. But Peter also asked the question about, have we missed animals in England? Absolutely, we've missed animals in England. We're just looking to identify premises where there is infection. So even in a report case, we're only sampling up to three animals on a premises. So there will almost certainly be many more infected animals there. That's why we're just reporting cases, not the number of animals. We've just done some surveillance along the south coast, and 68% of the farms that we sampled were all positive with at least one animal. One of the cases I remember, I think in Kent, of the 14 animals we tested there, 13 were positive. So it's not unusual to get that high level of positive animals on an individual premises. Oftentimes it's only two or three out of them, but yeah, there's a lot more infected animals out there.
Pilar?
Yes, I mean, you remind me of a situation on the first season when we confirmed the first case on the 10th of November. And we, as Gordon explained, we declared eventually two TCZs, one in Norfolk and one in Kent. And we did blanket surveillance, and we picked up 126 positive animals in total in 60 odd farms. None of them had clinical signs. And the explanation is that we were picking historic infections. So at some point they have gone through it, and they were not picked up on clinical. And then because they can become PCR positive for up to 5 to 6 months, and for serology for years, then you can still have positive results long after the clinical signs have gone.
And what was your first question again, William? Sorry.
Well, Pilar has just answered it there. It was how significant is it that there, as of yet, we don't have clinical signs on any of our local animals?
Okay. William, I think we've probably covered quite a bit there. Again, if there's anything that you want to draw out here further, but we will take questions away and provide answers. If UFU colleagues can provide them to us from this recording, whatever, anything that we haven't answered, we'll provide written responses, and they can go up on both the DAERA and the UFU website and be emailed to the attendees tonight, if that's okay with you.
No, that's grand. I think 2 hours is a long stint for this site.
I think the Q&A session has been tough on me now. I don't know.
It didn't take much out of me, Jim. I was glad to see you. but just at the end of this event, I want to thank our panelists. It's Ignatius, Gordon, Jim, Julian, Melanie, and Pilar, and David Kyle. I thank you all for your input, especially those that actually did the presentations. there's a great hunger for knowledge and to try to get a better understanding of how this may play out within Northern Ireland. And at farm level, there's a fear, you know, all farms need that ability to trade for their financial security, and this threatens that ability. And it's the uncertainty and the unknown of this disease that worries people. So, and when I think of that worry and that uncertainty, I would encourage the department to be as on top of their communications as they can possibly be in this. I know you are under stress and pressure to getting your head around this and meeting this challenge, but that communication part is crucial. But for now, I thank you all again. It was informative and useful and helpful, and hopefully we'll get any unanswered questions up on the website with appropriate answers. So for now, thank you and good night to everyone.
We'll just say as well, William, just subject to the views of your members and stuff, happy to come back again later as things develop and, you know, have another discussion if appropriate. And we're always available as well too, as you know. Thanks.
Yeah. No, and thanks for that, Jim. Yep. All the best, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.